Credit risk products in a matter of a few short years went from 10-20,000 crores to almost a total of 1,50,000 crores. Maturity reduces as time progresses.
Do you foresee any major credit event, any big collapse such as IL&FS or Dewan Housing Finance kind of collapse coming in the next 1 or 2 years?
We had a massive expansion in our credit cycle and it all busted.
For a common man, of course, the debt funds as a category are more, inclined to, the very educated, the corporate investor or institutional investor, they can understand easily and they can invest. But for a normal investor, they are saying, say like even I can understand equity fund, okay, large cap, mid cap, small cap, full stop. And within that, you make some mixtures. But here in debt funds, there are 13 more categories as per even SEBI standard. There are more categories than equity funds. And even within that fund, still the strategy is different between one and other, etc. Is one thing is there a way to simplify this? In general, you have told me that you have done it like liquidity, core, and satellite kind of approach you are taking. But so for a normal investor, it's difficult to understand one question. The second is, overseas, elsewhere, Europe or US or in the developed markets, do they have similar kind of categorization, like 15, 20 categories in debt funds?
So, first of all, really, there are three large risks that you take in debt. There is credit, there is duration, there is liquidity. Now, amongst these, liquidity risk is very difficult to map. But for the most part, if your credit quality is conservative, it is likely that you are carrying very little liquidity risk. So our request to the community basically has been only this, that advisors should help slot mutual fund products into core and satellite buckets, basis these two parameters of credit and duration risk. And over time, they should keep monitoring these products to determine that they are not changing characteristics. And then at an investor level, the allocation actually becomes very simple. It is go, let's say 70-80% in core, 20-30% in satellite, or if you're a very conservative investor, go 100% in core. Hand on heart, have we done this work? Right? We, like you said, we keep getting caught in these categories, in these names, in these 12, 13, 14, whatever number of names. Right? But ultimately, what are you buying? You're buying duration risk and credit risk. So why not segment at the very basic level, categorize into core and satellite, define minimum investment horizons, define percentage allocation for each bucket for each minimum investment horizon. That template can be then rolled out to your entire set of investors. Right? So that is how, we would look to simplify. See, the Western world has been doing it for much longer. So there are one, market liquidity also is better for various classes of assets. And there are various genuine risk profile for investors as well. And there are other instruments available to hedge your risk. So for example, instruments like credit default swaps or, certain credit indices which you can participate in to hedge your risk. Those are completely absent in India. So in some sense, the experiment that the mutual fund industry did over the last 5-7 years was to retailize credit risk, right? So credit risk products in a matter of a few short years went from 10-20,000 crores to almost a total of 1,50,000 crores. If you included credit risk funds and medium-term funds, which were being run as credit risk funds by many people. So it was a very short period of time to increase so much retail exposure to a category which was very ill understood and importantly had very little liquidity associated with it. So again, where we started this discussion, you have to appreciate the stage of evolution of the cycle we are in, both in terms of investor awareness, investor expectation, as well as liquidity in the financial market. So, the problem is that we read a lot, right? We look at various things, and then we have an urge to participate more in those things. And then in that entire discussion analysis, we forget exactly, which market we are working in and how much the market can allow you to take.
True. And one more thing is, there is always product innovation is always good, and we keep on getting in that category as well. So nowadays, these constant maturity funds and this rollover, what do you call roll down strategies. So these two, I think you guys also have. IDFC also has a roll down strategy, and you introduced some 2-3 years back, and this constant maturity is catching up. So to avoid duration risk, if I may say, so in very simple terms, how does these funds work?
See, constant maturity actually has a very limited, should have very limited interest with investors.
Okay.
Because as the name suggests, the maturity remains the same or within the same band, no matter how many years pass.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, suppose you're buying a 10-year constant maturity product, the duration risk on that will remain in the vicinity of 6. So even 5 years from now, that product will have 10-year maturity. So unless you have a need to participate in that long maturity profile, and why should you as a fixed income investor have that need? Unless, in a developed market economy concept, the thing is different because their inflation is low, returns from other asset classes are low. So therefore people invest in very long-term fixed income also. But in the case of India, I can't see a very large market for constant maturity.
Okay.
And it should belong in the satellite bucket because it takes longer duration risk. A better way probably than constant maturity could be an active managed gilt product. So, there the duration gets managed more actively. And so you're taking more fund manager risk, but, for over a period of time, the fund manager is delivered, you can select the right product. A roll down, on the other hand, maturity reduces as time progresses.
Okay.
So let's say you are buying hypothetically a 3-year roll down today. In 3 years time, the product maturity will virtually become negligible. So there the risk is reducing as time is progressing. And in theory, if your investment horizon is matched by the tenure of the roll down. So let's say if you are buying for 3 years, a 3-year roll down product, you are perfectly matching your investment horizon with the maturity profile of the product. And this product has actually much bigger audience and much better utility compared to a constant maturity product.
Good. That is that. Generally, and one more thing, I think you guys also have come up the recent past floating interest rate fund. So say like instead of choosing the maturity and all those things, I want to have a running return kind of, 1 year FD or 2 year FD, whatever it is, 5%, 5.5% right now as we speak. So if I want to get that kind of a return in general with high quality, whatever high quality is giving, will floating interest rate funds be a good option?
Well, you have to be very clear what a floating rate fund is. In fact, when we launched, we simultaneously put out a frequently asked question list on our website to basically dispel some of the myths related to floating rate funds. Right? So some people seem to believe that this is that magic option which will fully protect them against interest rate rises. I have seen quite a few advisors recommending floating rate funds because interest rates are about to rise. This is not strictly true. This is not true for a variety of reasons. The first reason is that the availability of pure floating rate instruments itself in India is quite constrained. So I can't create a very large book of pure floating rate instruments, and they tend to be illiquid as well. The other way that people create floating rate is synthetically, and this is slightly technical. They use interest rate swaps. So let's say I'm running a 5-year bond. I will use interest rate swaps, let's say maturing in 3 years, so that I'm running 5 years and the interest rate swap has 3 years. So my net maturity falls to 2 years. Right? Now, the problem in interest rate swap is that although it provides some amount of hedge, but it's not a perfect hedge. because many times interest rate swaps don't move exactly in the opposite, exactly in the same direction as the rate on the bond. So many times what happens is that bond yield may rise, but interest rate swap yield may not rise. So it's not a perfect hedge. It creates something called basis risk. Ultimately, the net risk that is being run by the product as far as interest rate fluctuation is concerned is the duration that the product carries. So unless a product has close to zero duration, it is always exposed to interest rate risk. So this is one more instance where people are more in love with the narrative rather than scratching the surface and looking at the truth. So for example, in the months of January and February, interest rates rose in India. Right? In January and February, yields rose.
Yeah.
You look at the example of floating rate funds, you compare them to low duration or short-term funds, you will find they have not done very, very well. Right? So floating rate funds have, so why did we do the product? Because we wanted a diluted credit strategy in the low duration short-term space. So we wanted a satellite bucket product, which was diluting credit quality to some extent in the low duration short-term space.
Okay.
So which is why we launched the floating rate fund, because it is running a slightly lesser AAA oriented portfolio than our core bucket products.
It's like 70-30, right? Huh?
70-30, minimum 70% in AAA equivalent, etc. So that was our motive for launching the product, and we very clearly have bucketed it as a satellite bucket product. But we made it very clear through the FAQs that please don't get lulled into these narratives. And remember, if it were such a perfect hedge, then any other product can also do it.
Yeah,
I can buy floating rate instruments in other products also. I can hedge using swaps in other products also. Why don't I do it then?
And also swaps will have some cost. Am I right?
There is a cost. There is a negative carry that you get there. You are right. And there is basis risk because they don't move in tandem as the bond yield moves.
Okay.
So I think it is each one of us responsibility as fund managers and as mutual fund spokespeople to clarify some of these myths. But I don't really find that happening too much, when I look around.
True. So like for corporates, this is a broader question, macro level question. For corporates, generally, mutual funds were also a source of funding. Okay, for many of the corporates, still you guys are doing. Now, my question is about the whole economy as a whole economy. Say like banks are not giving below certain credit rating. Okay, fund houses are not giving below certain credit rating. So where the corporates or entrepreneurs, all of them, small businesses and medium businesses, whatever you put it, the size. Of course, small businesses cannot come to mutual funds. When they go to banks, the banks are also not willing. So where will this funding come? One is a private equity thing that is separate. Said we should have a debt funding for these businesses which are upcoming. They will not have AAA rating in a day or AA rating for that matter, or many banks ask minimum BBB rating. So credit rating goes by many aspects because of a geography, because you are restricted to geography. Tamil Nadu is like Germany, for example, if I compare with geography. But a credit rating agency like CRISIL will say, you are present only in Tamil Nadu, so our rating will be below so and so. Right. You are not present all over India. So all those things goes on. So what do you think where the funding should come, to grow the businesses, to grow the companies, and they need some funding?
So, the first point, and that's a very valid question, because I have heard this argument in context of people justifying taking credit risk in a mutual fund, right? To say that if we stop taking credit risk, where will financing come?
Yeah, that is. Look, I agree. That is a different topic because you are handling money of investors, so you are.
So I completely disagree with that line of thought.
True.
The economic rationale of a mutual fund right now, for the reasons that we discussed, point of evolution of the market cycle, etc., is not necessarily to provide financing to lower rated corporates or borrowers.
Yeah.
The economic rationale is to financialize savings, is to incentivize people to move more and more into financial products, to abandon some bit of their physical saving, convert that into financial savings, by offering, easy to understand, low risk products. That to me, at this point in our evolution, is the economic rationale of a mutual fund.
Sure.
Now, as far as financing for some of these are concerned, see, it has to be through specific lending models. So it could be through, let's say, a small finance or a microfinance institution. It could be through government-backed programs, right? Or if the financier itself needs money, right? So if the institution itself needs money, then again there are refinancing avenues that can be that are and can be built over that. And lately there are a lot of RBI and government-backed schemes also, which provide liquidity and credit enhancement for lending to some of these sectors, which currently are facing a bit of a headwind. But that does not mean that it is posed as an economic rationale why mutual funds should be buying this, because the kind of damage we can do to your savings by straying very much from our liquidity and credit profile mandate is can be overwhelming.
Yeah, it is huge. I'm not asking mutual funds to fund it. The problem is, say, like as an economy, broader economy, I'm talking. Say, even today, India does not have an infrastructure financing institution.
You also have to remember our history. So, if you see our history for the last 10 odd years, we had a massive, expansion in our credit cycle, and it all busted.
Yes.
So between 2000, let's say 13, 14 to 2018, 19, we were basically stuck with that entire cleanup phase, where you had a very massive corporate NPA cycle, after which you had part of the NBFC system collapsed with ILFS, etc.
Yeah.
So lenders basically have faced a very bad time over these few years as they have been cleaning up their books. So there is a natural risk aversion that has set in for the time being. But hopefully now that most of the cleanup process is done. So you look at the major banks in the country, their corporate NPA cycle seems to be now largely behind them.
Yeah.
So they have provided, they have recognized, they have provided an incremental accretion there, maybe not as much at all. So they are on top of the problem. So if you give it a few more years, probably that cycle comes back where your risk appetite then allows you to start to lend to some of the other entities. So look at today, if most banks focus on the top tier corporates for lending, obviously the margin that they're making on that is very insubstantial. So at some juncture, as the economic outlook were to improve, as they become more confident about their liquidity and capital positions, they would start venturing back, and that cycle will restart. But one of the reasons why we are where we are is that we had an excess phase, both with respect to that entire corporate NPA cycle, and then some of the NBFC housing finance cycle.
True.
So I think again you have to give it the benefit of time for it to come back.
Yeah, I agree. Because now when I see the retail credit facilities available in India has improved quite a lot in the last 20 years or 25 years. Particularly in the last 20 years, I would say, now a good guy wants to buy a house, there is facility available for him based on his credit rating. Banks are fighting against each other. But the same is not true for corporates, even well-run corporates, in the sense smaller sized companies like 50 crore, 100 crore companies, 200 crore companies. They are running pillar to post to get these credits and at a very high rate. Still, even banks are charging 12%, 14%. Credit rates for
partly it's also because of this pandemic cycle, where if you see people call this a K-shaped recovery, because unfortunately the small to medium enterprises have suffered the biggest brunt of the crisis.
True.
Right. So which is why on the margin there may be slightly more reluctance to lend, but probably the first phase of this has to be driven by government-backed credit guarantee schemes, as what was rolled out last year. But obviously, it could be more widespread aimed, so that it covers more such small corporates.
Sure. I have one or two questions. Then we are good to finish. The thing: do you foresee any major credit events, in the sense any big collapse such as IL&FS or Divan Housing Finance kind of collapse coming in the next 1 or 2 years? I mean, looking at the overall system, just I'm asking.
Yeah, general sense is that we have done most of the cleaning up of the financial system.
Okay.
right? So credit standards are much tighter, like we just discussed. A lot of recognition has happened, and general monitoring levels are now at a very stringent level. The incremental stress that one talks about, which is generally talked about, is what will accrue to the unsecured small ticket loans, which is which is in the nature of the economic shock that we are currently experiencing, but that is likely to be very specific and very restricted. And most lenders have now a very, very large capital cushion. So when we look around and see most lenders, we actually feel very comforted. So we have, I think, done time with this 7-8 years of a financial system collapse and cleanup that we had to undergo. And we do seem to be now at a reasonably robust level of preparation as far as the financial system is concerned. So barring these specific areas of credit that are linked to the shock that we are currently experiencing, we don't really see too much of a major issue as far as such kind of risks are concerned going forward.
Okay.
That does not, however, mean that investors start to extend risk appetite. So this is a separate question, and that is a very separate question, because this is a view at the end of the day.
True.
It is not, something that you can too much stretch for.
Okay. Thanks, Suyash. Just the last question. What Suyash does in his free time, and what is your family, and what do you like, dislike, whatever you want to share, you are free.
I'm actually a reasonably boring person. I don't have too many hobbies. Fortunately, you did not ask me about some good books that I have read, because I only read fiction. I don't read non-fiction at all. So most of the very commonly regarded investment books also I have never read. I'm quite, ashamed to say. But that is the nature of my relaxation, because in my working hours there is so much reading, etc., that one does. So generally I just like to read fiction. I like to watch some TV. There is through all these Netflix, etc., there are quite a few engaging serials that have come about. Obviously for the last 1.5 years we are locked up at home. I could exercise more, which I'm not doing, which I intend to do shortly, because I think I should focus more on my health. So that's something that I intend to do. But generally, a very boring person, actually.
Thank you, Suyash. Thank you for taking time out and spending close to an hour with us. And probably whenever you are visiting, to see your clients or someone at Chennai, please do drop by. Till then, stay safe.
Pleasure, and it was very much fun talking to you. And thank you so much for inviting me.
Sure, Suyash. Thank you. Have a good day and stay safe.